The VibeCatch podcast brings you the latest in employee engagement, workforce productivity, and people analytics.
Hi everybody, this is Konstantin from VibeCatch, and welcome to the VibeCatch podcast. Today I'm honored to have Max Hunter with me, Chief Joy Officer at Loylogic and founder at Motivators at Work. Welcome, Max.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Max, we've been doing this podcast series now for about a year, and I'm so happy that you took the time to sit with us today, because you have quite a lot of experience in working with international companies on different countries and different continents. So what I would like to start with maybe is, like, in your experience, what you've seen, what do you think would be the common pitfalls of employee engagement programs? Like, what works and what doesn't, and what to measure?
Yeah, so in my role as Chief Joy Officer at Loylogic, I'm actually on the leadership team, and it is my role specifically and only to create a place to work where employees wake up on a Monday morning and can't wait to go back to work, which of course might feel a bit far-fetched to some people. But at the end of the day, of course, what that is all about is employee engagement and, maybe more importantly, employee motivation. So obviously that Monday morning feeling does not come from having fruit bowls or a football table. When you wake up on Monday morning, they're not the things that give you either that positive or negative Monday morning feeling. So I worked intensely at first on listening into people, of course, as you do with VibeCatch, but listening in intently, both with surveys such as yours, but also with interviews, just talking to people and listening to what is it that gets in the way of Monday morning feeling great? What is it that gets in the way of that Monday morning motivation? But you've got to really listen to lots of different people in lots of different areas, probably more importantly from the ground up, of course, from the not just the leaders. And once you've listened, really listened, you get a feeling for what stands in the way. And now what stands in the way is often some things that are not that easy for the leaders to hear, right? Because from the top, they don't understand it at first. So the big pitfall, first of all, the hardest thing is to get the leaders to listen, okay? Because they'll jump very quickly to, well, that's because my people are lazy, or that's because my people aren't smart enough, or they're not motivated enough, or they're not innovative enough, or they don't care enough. That's the view they have from the top. So really, with the information that you've gathered from listening in, you've got to put that in front of them in a way that motivates them to do something about it. And the way that I've typically done that, and I do that now with other organizations as part of Motivators at Work, is to ask them if they think people are waking up on a Monday morning and are looking forward to going to work. Do they think everyone is? And they typically say no, of course. And then you say, well, what if they were? Would that make a difference to your organization? They say, well, yeah, of course. Of course, even the most numbers people get that fact. And so then they want to start listening. And then you can talk to them in stories about what gets in the way of Monday morning motivation. Yes, the numbers help. You've also got to put some stories behind it. The story of Steve, and this happens. And then they start to realize what it's like working on the front line, so that they start to realize, okay, so if we did this for Steve instead, then he would be more motivated and be more productive. So the big pitfall is not getting leadership to buy in, because if they're not bought in, then you're constantly pushing water uphill.
This is something that this is so great, because this is something that we also faced many times, in that sense that leadership in a sense does not probably know what's happening below, if you want to say that. And the bigger the company, also we face that the bigger the company, the more difficult it is to get the message from below to the top. And that's one of the questions that I would like maybe us to address. Like, how do you, like, the bigger the company, the more difficult it is. How do you manage that in a larger environment? Because in a smaller company, you probably meet everybody every day at work. So you see everybody. You can ask, hey, how do you feel? You can see some of the problems happening right in front of your eyes. But the bigger the company, the more challenging it is.
Yeah, absolutely. The more levels of hierarchy, the more people, the harder it is to have that empathy for everyone in the organization. You're absolutely right. And that you need to find ways to close the gap, as it were. Yes, constant information flowing, yes, from the top down, but also from the bottom up. So everything from the kinds of information that tools like yours provide, VibeCatch, to constantly get a temperature check for how are we doing with that kind of motivation. Let's try one or two things. Let's see how it shifts.
Yeah.
And so they start to get a belief that this stuff makes a difference, not just from a being nice to people perspective, but from a business perspective. And I think that's one way. And the other way, of course, there's other ways to increase the flow of information throughout the company. So yeah, your kind of tool is definitely also one of them, but then also things like employee communication tools, things like Spencer, or things like that, or workplace, things that show the people at the top as well as the people at the bottom that there's lots and lots of human beings here, because then the empathy starts to grow. And there's two elements here. One, there's this common perceived myth that you can either focus on doing business or you can focus on being nice to people. And leadership often say, okay, every bit of time and investment that I spend on being nice to people is investment I'm taking away from the business side. And we need to get out of that binary thinking, it's either or, to no, it's not about being nice and being stroking people, and it's not really about that. Or it's that. And if you can get people to wake up on a Monday morning with that motivation in their hearts, it's good for people and it's good for business. And the key is to really dig into what drives that. So that's absolutely huge. To be able to get the mindset away from it's either people or it's business.
What a lot of people forget is that businesses are done by people, with people, and for people. So it's not like a machine that does business. It's just it's people. Like in sales, you sell to other people. You don't sell necessarily to other businesses. Of course, the business has a legal entity, but you sell to people.
Yeah, of course. I think everyone pays lip service to that. Every leader will say that. Our most valuable asset is our people. But then how do they act on it? And do they really believe it? Because unfortunately, our current operating model for our organizations was designed pretty much during the time of the Industrial Revolution, which was when things were mechanical. It was a machine where people had to do the same repetitive task 1,000 times a day, clock in, clock out. And so we built our organizations like machines. Unfortunately, the model remains in place. So whilst people say people are our biggest asset, they typically still seem to say, well, there's either the machine side, as in the getting stuff done, or the people side. And that's a big weight to shift. But that's where things like this constant communication from the bottom up through tools like VibeCatch, but also through other digital means, and of course through simple human interaction, increase that sense of empathy to start to influence leaders to realize that it really is about people, and that when people's motivation can be measured and looked at and quantified, but also believed in stories, that starts to shift the paradigm.
Fully agree, Max. Fully agree. And building on top of that question, because we talked about the bottom up and the top down approach. Who would be responsible for employee engagement in a company, and how to make that clear? Because what we face is many times that we meet with HR managers who say, well, we are responsible, and then leaders are like, no, we are responsible. So then there is kind of like maybe a misconception or a misunderstanding of who is responsible, if any, or are we all responsible?
Yeah. Short answer is all. Longer, slightly controversial answer.
Okay.
Each leader should care about the motivation of their team. They are the one that has the most contact. They're the ones that set the tone. They're the ones who create the conditions for whether a person wakes up on Monday morning looking forward to go to work or with a pit of dread in their stomach. At the end of the day, my team, my leader will be the ones that dictate that in truth. So if every business leader, if every team leader, if everyone in a team felt responsible for the motivation of their employees, then we would no longer need HR. That's the controversial bit. We wouldn't have, maybe for the legal stuff, recruitment stuff, but not for the most important stuff. However, we're a long way away from that. So this is a big message to HR in my perspective. Create a focus on that listening into the organization within HR. Create a focus on then trying to influence or tell these stories and this information to the business leaders, because HR has a huge role now in taking us from leaders who only care about business results to leaders who realize the importance of the people on those business results. So we've still got years or even decades where HR's role here is crucial, to one day even make themselves no longer needed in that respect, because then the leaders have it in their hearts and minds that actually the best thing they can do in their job to drive the best results is to create a motivated workforce.
Great. I fully agree on that. There's a saying that people don't leave companies, they leave bad managers. And I'm sure you've heard this before. What would you say how to spot the signs of bad management, and what can we do, practical steps to spot that and to avoid that?
Yeah, so whilst I do partly agree with the statement, people don't leave companies, they leave bad managers, of course it has a huge impact. I think for me, the bigger answer or the bigger kind of question is, what is it in the system of our organization that allows those bad managers? I believe more in the phrase, don't blame the player, blame the game. Because in a game or organization that doesn't allow bad management, that would never happen. But the organizations typically allow bad managers to not only be that, but sometimes to thrive and go higher and higher, because they are either producing results, seemingly short-term results, or because they are putting themselves in the best light. I think we need to get away from managers or leaders who are there to prove themselves versus a focus on a core KPI for managers and leaders, which is how motivated are your people? Because we're too focused on the non-people side of management and leadership when we measure leaders and managers, right? We talk about KPIs for them like sales or profit or productivity or whatever. I've rarely seen a KPI for a manager or leader which is the motivation of your people. And if that was the top KPI, if that's what the game focused on as what winning means, then we wouldn't have players, as it were, or bad managers who are allowed to focus on their own personal results at the cost and detriment to their people.
I love that. I love the meter of the happiness of the people, the measurement. I think that a lot of companies don't, even countries, we're measured like a country is measured by a GDP, but never a country has been so far measured about the happiness factor. Like how happy is a country, and putting that down, going further down to companies and to teams, like how happy and joyful is your team, because that eventually leads into a more productive and a more profitable team and eventually company.
Indeed, and just to help you and others, there is a country which focuses on happiness. The country of Bhutan has a gross national happiness index, and actually a person in the government whose key focus it is to look at that. So it has started, but yes, obviously in kind of Bhutan is not necessarily the biggest country in the world, but it has started. And yes, I had the job on the leadership team of Chief Joint Officer where that was my key focus. But what made it difficult at times was it was not a KPI on the manager's radar. And actually, as I say, happiness is a great word for people that get it. But unfortunately, a lot of business leaders think happiness is a nice to have. Does that mean they sometimes worry, if I get my managers to focus on happiness, they'll do anything they can to make sure my employees aren't complaining. So therefore they'll take it easy on them. They'll make their life easy so they've got no problems. That's why I would focus more on motivation, because if you're motivated to go to work on a Monday morning, that's a very different KPI in my perspective, in terms of, it's not just, I've got an easy life, but I've got a life that I look forward to at work. And by looking forward to means also therefore making a difference, which is good for people and good for business.
I agree, and because you mentioned the happiness, that managers don't focus on happiness. I think that one of the reasons is why is that? Because they don't see any profitability in that. They don't see numbers. Like, okay, if Max is happy, like, what does that translate for me as a leader or for the company in itself? How can I monetize, in a way, Max's happiness, right? So, and a lot of managers, I feel that they don't really understand that actually happy employee engagement and happy engaged employees, actually the spillover of that is not only well-being but productivity and profitability of the company. So if you have really, like you mentioned, if you have employees that are happy to come on Monday morning, that can't wait the weekend to, like, there is no weekend basically in that sense, like as a mindset, then obviously at the end of the year, at the end of the month, you can actually see that happiness quantify into profitability and eventually more revenue, better customer satisfaction, and etc.
Yeah, absolutely. And at Motivators at Work, we've distilled all the work I did as Chief Joy Officer into a framework as well to understand the key drivers of that motivation. It's called The Roots and Fruits. You can find it, I'm sure, on our website at Motivators at Work, or indeed on my LinkedIn profile. But to try and make that motivation tangible for leaders, what are the key factors that drive it, and what impact does it have? So, for example, if you increase people's sense of belonging, there will be less siloed mentality and more collaboration. If you increase people's sense that they're doing what they love and they don't get overruled, that's where you get more innovative. Because often leaders say, people are doing siloed thinking, they're not working together to make great stuff, they don't care about where we're going. My people aren't innovative enough. We need more innovation. I mean, we hear that all the time. We need people to step up and take on more responsibility. Once you ask leaders, what is it that kind of keeps you awake at night with your people, those things will always turn up. And then you can turn that around and say, okay, then let's look at what's hampering those things. Let's look at the game, not the players, and see how we can unlock the key to all that. Because you employed great people. I'm sure when you were in the interview with them, you didn't employ them believing they weren't those things, but something in your system is hampering them from doing so. So to really then look at what are the key actions that we can take to unlock the things that are keeping you awake at night.
Max, thank you so much for this insightful interview. And for our listeners, you can find the links of Max Motivators at Work and Loylogic, as well as some other resources in the podcast description. Thank you so much. And until next time.
Real pleasure. Thank you very much, Konstantin.
Thanks for listening to the VibeCatch podcast. Visit our website, VibeCatch.com, for more resources and insights on employee engagement, human productivity, and HR technology. Don't forget to subscribe to get the latest podcast right in your inbox.